Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, great. So welcome everybody to the first class under the rubric of democracy and disagreement. I'm Deborah Satz, and I'm an instructor in the course along with Paul Brest. I'm also a philosophy professor. Paul is an emeriti law professor. And for now, we're also both sitting deans, Paul of the law school, and I of the School of Humanities and Sciences. So you see, having two school deans at Stanford launching a course like this tells you this is something very important to us. And I'll say a little bit about why it's so important to us and why we are excited about the coming weeks and about our discussion and our journey together. So what's the course about? Well, deep disagreement pervades our democracy, from arguments about immigration, gun control, abortion, the Mideast crisis, to the function of elite higher education, and to the value of free speech itself. Such disagreement is not by itself a cause for concern. We should expect that in a democratic society, that is a society not run by a king or an autocrat, a society based on the equal freedom and equal status of its members, reasonable people will disagree about many things. Some of the deepest questions we face, questions of morality, of religion, and of value, are really hard to think through. Even people who are well-motivated and conscientious will answer questions pertaining to some of these matters in different ways, perhaps because of their different life experiences, or because the facts are hard to pin down and admit of a variety of interpretations, or because people will make different trade-offs among competing values. So reasonable disagreement is a fact of life. Not all disagreement is reasonable, and in this class we will be constrained in our pursuit of disagreement by facts. And so one motto you might take is, although you're entitled to your own opinions, you're not entitled to your own facts. When I often think when I was growing up, it was pretty common for me to have many, many disagreements with my friends and my family over really important issues. But we shared more or less, and more or less because facts can be hard to interpret and because facts are often incomplete and there's a lot we don't know. But we basically had reference to the same facts. You don't get to make up your own facts just to suit your position. And so in our discussions, we'll be looking at what we know, what we don't know, where facts are really open. So disagreement, as I said, is not by itself a cause for concern. What is a cause for concern is when disagreements are taken to be immune from evidence and critical scrutiny, when loud voices drown out dissenting views, when minds are closed, when humility is seen as a vice, and when a culture of incivility prevails with respect to those with whom we disagree. Note that by incivility, I'm not talking about politeness. This isn't meant to be a kumbaya on stage that we all love each other and get together. We disagree about a lot of really important things. I'm talking about the failure to treat other people as deserving of respect simply because they hold different views than we do on matters that we care about. This, what I'll call illiberal attitude, not politically liberal, but capaciously liberal in the sense of being a free citizen, not tolerating the free expression of other citizens' reasonable views is a special concern for a university. And that's why Paul and I really were motivated to put on this class. The fundamental mission of a university is the pursuit of knowledge. And it absolutely depends on the free exchange of ideas and of an openness to question received opinion. It's because we feel this mission is under stress from forces both outside and inside the university that Paul and I decided to launch this class. Furthermore, we believe that what I'm calling a liberalism is not just bad for the university, for Stanford and other universities, it's bad for democracy, because democracies have to solve problems together and we have to live together. And as universities, we also have a part to play in producing responsible citizens who will go on and engage with people in a diverse society holding different views and trying to see where and to what extent we can come together. So that's a little statement about why we're doing the class, but please feel free to disagree with, you may not think this is the right reason to be doing the class, and there are other reasons, and that's fine. Each week is going to feature scholars who disagree, sometimes very strongly about major policy issues. We will have one class where one person disagrees with himself because he works on immigration, and two leading newspapers, I think it's the Washington Post and the New York Times, published his data and drew diverse positions from his diametrically opposed positions from his research. And he decided it was interesting to show that the research he does could actually support these diametrically opposing opinions. So he'll go back and forth. But otherwise, we have guests who represent different positions. Each week, the speakers will disagree, but the idea is to follow the evidence and to present reasons to each other and to you, and for you to present reasons back to us that we can understand and acknowledge. As we note on the syllabus, the course is offered in the spirit of the observation by Hannah Holborn Gray, who was president of the University of Chicago, and she said that education, quote, should not be intended to make people comfortable. It is meant to make them think. And we want this to be a class that encourages, demands, motivates all of us to think hard about hard questions. So each class has a different topic with different speakers. Speakers will talk, each giving a brief set of remarks, and then in conversation, probably for about 50 minutes. And then with Paul or I serving as moderator each week, then we'll open the floor for comments and questions from the audience. We're also going to be surveying the audience at the beginning and the end of each class to see whether arguments move minds. Now, moving minds isn't the goal of the class. You might not move your mind. Even if you don't move your mind, we hope that hearing a diversity of opinions deepens your own understanding of the position you do hold and why you hold it, and gives you some appreciation for why people might disagree with you. To be clear about the ground rules, we recognize that engaging in respectful conversation is only one mode of bringing one's case to one's fellows. It's only one kind of way citizens can engage with one another. Protest and organizing are also legitimate modes of engagement, although subject to time and place restrictions. For anyone who feels motivated to protest particular speakers, there's a free speech zone outside the classroom for doing so. Inside the classroom, the way to deal with views that you disagree with is through questions and comments, through making your case to your fellows and to our speakers and to the audience, and we'll provide as much time as possible for audience questions. And now I think Paul will say a few things about the class, and then I'll come back and just add a few things about our speakers and the topic.
Thanks, Deborah. So Deborah has spoken for both of us, and I'll just add a couple of brief points. I had the privilege this last quarter of teaching College 102, Citizenship in the 21st Century, and I know that at least one of the students in the class is here. And I was co-teaching it with Graham Ambrose, who's sitting here and who has the challenging task of being TA for this very large course. There he is. So many of our readings were chosen in the spirit of this course, of considering many sides of an issue, and one reading seemed to me especially relevant as we go forward here. In his justifiably famous book, On Liberty, John Stuart Mill wrote, and I'll just quote from him, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. Nor is it enough that he should hear the opinions of his adversaries from his own teachers, presented as they state them and accompanied by what they offer as refutations. He must be able to hear them from persons who actually believe them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form." And that's really the goal of this course. And before Deborah introduces today's topic and speaker, if you're a student enrolled in the course, could you please scan the QR code, which will be up there, and fill out the Google form in attendance. And now back to Deborah to introduce the topic and speaker.
Okay. So, following the Supreme Court decision against affirmative action this past June, legacy admissions, which give preferential treatment to the children of alumni, are under increased scrutiny. An influential study co-authored by Raj Chetty, David Deming, and John Friedman found that students from families in the top 1% are more than twice as likely to attend an Ivy Plus college, Harvard, Brown, Dartmouth, et cetera, but also Stanford, MIT, Duke, and Chicago, than those from middle-class families with the same test scores. They find that the high-income admissions advantage is driven by three factors: legacy admissions, non-academic credentials, which tend to favor those from private high schools, and recruitment of athletes. Changing such factors could then lead to greater socioeconomic diversity in leadership positions, which are drawn disproportionately from these schools. So though only 1% or less than 1% of students in the United States attend an Ivy Plus school, if you look at corporate CEOs, it's about 10%. If you look at Congress, I think it's about 25%. If you look at Supreme Court judges in the last 50 years, it's something like 35 or 40%. So these schools disproportionately launch people into very important leadership roles. So changing the demographics of who attends college changes not only the composition of the class, but composition of very important positions in society. So national debate on this topic is heating up, and the California legislature has been asked to join other US states in a move to legally ban legacy admissions. So this turn of events raises a lot of questions. Why do universities practice legacy admissions? Is it justifiable? Why or why not? If it is justifiable, are there any limits on it? And if it's not justifiable, Should it be banned by law? So before we begin, we'd like to get your views on the general topic. And before and after the conversation, and you can access the poll in 3 ways: the QR code text or a web browser. QR text or web browser, and you're invited to participate in the poll even if you're just auditing. And we're going to ask you this question: should Stanford continue with legacy admissions before our discussion and after our discussion, just to see what the read of the room is, and again, were minds changed. Okay, so now let me just briefly introduce our 2 speakers. We're very pleased to have 2 fine scholars to discuss these issues with us. Dustin Schroeder is an associate professor of geoengineering and electrical engineering who studies ice and water on Earth and in the solar system. I think he's a specialist on icy moons. Maybe there's a connection there to legacy, I'm sure, but it's harder to see. But he's also the faculty director of the Citizenship Quarter for College, and he's a member of QAFA, our Faculty Senate Committee on Undergraduate Admissions and Financial Aid. Rick Banks is the Jackson Eli Reynolds Professor of Law in the Stanford Law School, and he's a faculty director of the Center for Racial Justice. He's written on employment discrimination and race and the law, and has a long-standing interest in higher education. In fact, he's a professor by courtesy in the School of Education. He's the author of numerous law journal articles, and the book is Marriage for White People: How the African-American Marriage Decline Affects Everyone. He's also a member of QAFA and is writing a book on matters pertaining to higher education and access. Before we begin, I want to stress that Dusty and Rick's opinions are not official opinions. They're not official university opinions, and that's important for many reasons, but one is they disagree with each other, and it would be unfortunate if the university had an official contradictory position. So it is not an official position. They're here speaking for themselves, presenting their own individual views. They can't comment on details that take place in QAFA or on Stanford admissions data that's not publicly available. However, there's plenty of available data to inform our discussion. The Chetty study that I cited includes the Ivy Plus schools, and our speakers have plenty to say about the issues in general. So please join me in welcoming our speakers as our guests, and I think Rick is going to start us off.
We decided to switch.
We're going to switch it. Yeah.
They decided to switch. Already disagreeing.
Should we go up there and say?
We stay here, right? Or, do we go up? Or
No,
we,
you
no,
can
we sit?
Whatever you want.
Okay, yeah, let's sit.
I'll go up. But
Okay, I'm going to talk from sitting here. We're going to disagree about the right
gonna
place
sit.
to stand. I'm Dustin Schroeder. I'm not a geoengineering professor. I'm a geophysics and electrical engineering professor. So we use physics to study the Earth, and then we engineer radars to also study the Earth and other planets. It's amazing to me that I get to be part of this. It's incredibly humbling. Higher education matters an incredible amount to me, and the specific topic of admissions has been incredibly impacting on my life personally. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I grew up repairing appliances with my dad, and the fact that a university chose to admit me just utterly changed the entire arc of my life, my cousin's life, my entire family's life, and the attraction to be a professor and be in higher education and get to serve on committees like this, on stage like this, is all an effort to share that opportunity with other people, be a steward of the types of institutions that can do that, and a vain attempt to pay back an infinite karmic debt that I will die with it still being unpaid. So it's amazing to me that in a place like this, on a stage like this, I get to have opinions about this. And my opinions on this topic are definitely shaped by that personal experience with questions of admissions. So at least when I think about this, especially in the context of an elite, super selective, like 4% admissions rate university. I'll talk louder. All right. Can you hear me now? All right. So when I think of an elite, super selective university, what can those universities do that are like really powerful and impacting? And I think one of the things is, and it was said in the introduction, is produce knowledge. I think one of the ways that the selectivity relates to producing knowledge is that if you do, and I think anybody's here who's in these classrooms, who's in these research spaces, if you collect really smart, really driven, really passionate people together in a space, either our faculty or our students, you can solve problems faster, better, make breakthroughs, create art, create insights that you couldn't if you didn't have this collection of people. And that's one of the amazing luxuries and powers of being on a campus like this. It also changes how you teach. When you have students in a classroom who you can just say, okay, this part, teach yourself, and then together we're going to work on the next thing. That's an amazing thing, and it allows you to transmit and create knowledge better and faster. And so I think one of the things we're doing when we're trying to do admissions is collect these people. And I think, at least in my experience, many of the smartest people I know, most passionate, driven people I know, are people I grew up with who were working in factories, on farms, as janitors. I think talent is distributed everywhere. And so one of the challenges when you want to take an admissions process and identify who these exceptional, transformative thinkers, learners, coworkers are, it is hard because the path up until the moment of admissions is so unequal. So then the question is looking at everyone's application files and saying, who has this unrealized potential that might actually be this transformative thinker, learner who we should have here? And there's so few spots, it's a hard choice. But to me, when I think about that hard, important work of the admissions office, the odds that the really transformative person who didn't know how to really take advantage of all the opportunities or present themselves in the best light or have opportunities now, but once they have it, they'll really blossom. The odds that those people are the children of people who already went to a place like this seems low to me. Seems low that there is unrealized latent potential in that case. And that if we're doing the hard work of placing bets on people, those seem like the wrong bets to make for me in edge cases. Now, some of the most amazing people I've ever met as scholars are the children of legacy, but I don't think in the edge cases we should be nudging it that way. I think it's the wrong direction to nudge a bet. The second reason, the second thing that I think these elite universities are amazing at is really transforming people's lives. Like, this is my personal story. It's unbelievable, the scale and completeness of the transformation. And that is one admission spot. And so for me, the main thing when I think about questions of choices of how we use our limited resources of spots, I want to always hold that in each spot we use for some other purpose, we could have changed an entire additional family's life. And so for me, that's a really high bar to buy other, for me, smaller goods. Now, there are things I think that are worth it, and I think this knowledge production giant breakthrough thing I think is worth it. But I think that should be weighty. And again, that makes me think that a general policy of generally erring on the sides of families who've already had access to places like this seems like not how I would do it. The third thing that I think is really powerful about these great universities is the expertise offered to the wider world, to our community here, to the country, to the world. And I think even the people I grew up, repairing appliances with, if you said, hey, there's this collection of the smartest, most passionate, most capable people we've ever met, and we're just going to collect them all together. They all thought about this, and they think this is the case. Or there's this insight. That's, I think, almost everyone I grew up would find that a very compelling thing. But if you said instead, hey, there's this sort of club of people who've let in other people in their club, and they think this, that's less compelling. And I think because there are such smart people everywhere, I think when you have people across the country who know someone so smart from their school, from their county, from their whole quarter of their state, and say, you know what, that person, they're just not as capable as like over a dozen people a year from the high school across the street. That, to me, undermines our ability to be a source of expertise and makes us seem less like a collection of scholars of the best and the brightest and more like a country club. And for these 3 reasons, I think that the practice of legacy undermines 3 of the things I think are so amazing about universities. Now, I've discussed with thoughtful people about other reasons you might do it. And there's an argument, sort of flavors of an argument that say, look, all these things you're talking about that are so great, they're built on something. And there are things that institutions like this need. There's things like money and donations, they need that. There's things like really dedicated groups of supporters and alumni, things like that. You need to have, if it's going to be a ladder of social mobility, you need critical mass of the elite there, or else it's going to stop serving this function. But to me, in each of those things that maybe we need, legacy admissions is a really blunt instrument. And I think if those are things we need to do, we should do it in as efficient a way as possible, bearing in mind that each slot we use for those things to allow it to exist could have this transformative effect. And I think more targeted ways than legacy could do that more efficiently. So these are the reasons that I think in general, I'm not that into it.
Thank you.
Wow. Wonderful. Hey, I'm going to stand up if you don't mind. Okay. Okay. I'm delighted to be here. Let me thank. I'm delighted to be here, not because of anything that I'm going to say, but frankly because I've already learned something from Dusty. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Let me just start by thanking all of you for coming, and thank you to Paul and Deborah for having the vision to have this sort of discussion. It's very much needed, and then being able to execute it, and for inviting me. So I really appreciate that. So there's a lot that Dusty and I agree on. And there are also areas of divergence. So, I'll give some attention to both of those. I think that it's clear, as Deborah mentioned, that legacy preferences became much more salient, much more in the public eye after the Supreme Court's decision in Students for Fair Admissions. That was the case against Harvard and North Carolina, where the plaintiffs filed the suit in order to invalidate race-based affirmative action across the country, and the Supreme Court accepted their invitation and did so. So now race-based admissions are illegal at Stanford and every other university in the United States. This is not a ruling that I support or agree with or that I think was good policy. And not only because affirmative action is probably what helped this child years ago from inner city Cleveland to make it to a place like Stanford. But so the Supreme Court's decision, though, in the Students for Fair Admissions case, it highlighted legacy preferences because what the trial showed, or what the discovery, as lawyers say, showed in that case, was that legacy preferences were really significant in the admissions process. Yet, while the court struck down race-based admissions, race-based affirmative action, it left completely untouched. And the plaintiffs made no allegations even about the propriety of legacy preferences. And this seems somewhat perverse to many people, because while affirmative action benefited members of historically disadvantaged groups, legacy preferences, in contrast, benefit people who are from some of the most advantaged groups in society. The beneficiaries of legacy preferences are, as Deborah mentioned, they're disproportionately white, disproportionately high income. While not uniformly so, that tends to be the case. The attention accorded legacy preferences led to a political response. Not only in California, but at the federal level, legislation has been introduced that would prohibit universities from relying on legacy preferences. And the impetus for this legislation across the nation is this widespread sense, which I think is correct, which is that legacy preferences are really unfair. This is one of the places where I think Dustin and I completely agree. Legacy preferences are unfair. There is no educational justification for according preference to a child because their parent was someone who attended the university, or a grandparent or some other family member attended university decades earlier. Patently unfair. But here's the rub, and here's maybe where Dustin and I have a different perspective. The fact that legacy preferences are unfair does not mean that they should be prohibited by the legislature. Let me repeat that. The fact that legacy preferences are unfair, and they are, does not mean they should be prohibited by the legislature. This is not an unusual argument I'm making. This is a commonplace logic within the law. The idea stated generally is that even practices that are unfair, they might nonetheless be justifiable if they strongly further some sufficiently important institutional interest. And there are at least two legitimate reasons that a university might want to retain legacy preferences. One reason is what people in enrollment might call yield management. Schools have a desire or an incentive to admit more legacy applicants because they know, based on their own research and lots of research done by independent scholars, that legacy applicants, if admitted, are more likely to enroll. You might attribute this to the desire of children to sort of experience the institution that their parents experienced. You might think that the parents brought the children to visit and they kind of became enamored of the school on those visits. Or you might just imagine a mom and dad say, look, if you want me to pay for this, you better go to where I went, because that's what I imagine. And as a parent, yes, it is really difficult to not imagine your child as living out the dreams that you might have for them. Whatever the reason, it is in fact the case that when legacies are admitted, they're more likely to enroll. And that's significant because the yield, that is the percentage of applicants who are admitted who enroll, that's one of the key ingredients in the college status game of which all of us, by virtue of being here, are part. Every university in this country is trying to increase their yield. And the reason they want to do that is when they increase the yield, that allows them to admit fewer students. It might seem perverse, but the goal of the university is to admit as few students as possible, because the fewer the students you admit, the more selective the university is. As the admissions rate goes down, selectivity increases, status, prominence, desirability in the eyes of students, those all rise as well. And all the undergrads here, if any of you say you didn't check admission statistics before you applied to Stanford or other schools, you're probably not being honest with yourself. If you didn't do it, your counselor did it, your parents did it, someone else did it. That information was part of your decision making because that's a central piece of how this whole college game works. So universities, now we might raise questions about the game and whether the game should be different. But it is a fact that universities have a legitimate interest in increasing their yield, increasing selectivity through driving down the number of students they accept. A second reason that universities might pay attention to legacy status, which is alluded to by Dusty, is that legacies may be a part of the fundraising process. You can think of legacies as kind of a cousin of another factor in the admissions processes at many universities, which is that students who are from families where the parents or other family members may be donors to the university, they're also given special consideration. Legacy is not unrelated to that. It might be a cousin or maybe a half-sibling, maybe even a sibling, an indirect way of bolstering fundraising. This is significant because fundraising considerations have long been central to the admissions processes of America's wealthiest universities. Harvard, which is the subject of the lawsuit and which has long practiced legacy admissions for more than a century now, became the wealthiest university in the world in part precisely because of those admissions practices. That's no overstatement. The universities, you know, we can look overseas at other universities where people often note they don't have legacy admissions at Oxford, they don't have legacy admissions at Cambridge. Well, they also don't have nearly endowment of that we see at a place like Harvard. Harvard endowment is 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times more than endowments at other universities who don't have legacy admissions. In either of these ways, either through helping with yield management or through helping with fundraising, legacy preferences may, and I emphasize may be a part of the business model of an elite private university. The leeway we've given universities to develop their own business models in turn is an important contributor to their extraordinary success. In other words, one of the things that makes the United States system of higher education distinctive compared to most systems around the world is, well, one is that private universities are at the top of the system rather than public government-run universities. And those private universities in the United States, they're actually given more leeway, more autonomy. They're given more discretion. They're given more slack. Whatever your term is, they're given more choice in how to run their institution. America's private universities, as a result of that autonomy they've been given, have become the most prominent, the most sought after, and the wealthiest universities in the world. Full stop. One might even say in the history of the world. Yet, when we talk about many aspects of universities, including admissions, we go to great lengths collectively to deny the legitimacy of such business considerations. We want to imagine that education or research is the sole criterion of decision making. Universities are, of course, complicit in this in many ways. It would be a bad thing, I think, if we take this autonomy away from universities. This is one of the reasons I'm so opposed to the Supreme Court's decision in Students for Fair Admissions. The court took away from universities autonomy that they had enjoyed for the last 50 years. It might be fine for legislatures to specify the societal goods they want universities to produce, whether it be helping local communities, producing knowledge for the benefit of humanity, educating as many students as possible, promoting social mobility, fostering racial equality. There are lots of things society needs us to do, and it's fine for the government, state or federal, to begin to specify some of the things that it wants universities to do. But we should leave it to the universities to figure out precisely how to further those goals. There's one other consideration I'll close with, which should also give us pause when we look at legislative efforts to micromanage universities. In prohibiting legacy preferences, government officials aim, sometimes implicitly, sometimes quite deliberately, to promote what we might call meritocracy. And Dusty alluded to this, and I know there's a later session on meritocracy, which I will be attending for sure, right? That'll be a good one. Let me just say for now, perhaps as a teaser for the later session, that while meritocracy, the idea of collecting, right, the smartest people or the highest achievers together in one place, is often taken for granted as what a university should be doing, the case in favor of making the system even more meritocratic is a complicated one. And in fact, I think it's not nearly as strong a case as most people assume. The benefits of meritocracy in the educational context are probably overstated, and the costs are underappreciated. If the removal of legacy admissions results in further entrenchment of meritocracy in higher education, if it makes our institutions even more meritocratic, I actually would say that's a bad thing. That's not a win that we should celebrate. Just to be clear on my bottom line here, I'm not opposed to ending legacy preferences. If it turns out that a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, universities no longer have legacy preferences, I'm fine with that. But I do think that those decisions should be made by the institutions themselves, not by a legislator in Sacramento or Washington. Thank you so much.
Do you want to respond, or?
Sure. So yeah, I guess the two areas where we seem to disagree a lot. One is on the meritocracy point, and I think we can probably dig into that a lot. I strongly disagree with that. I think if we became more meritocratic, I think that's all to the good, and the goods outweigh the bad. So we can dig into that more. I think the other area which is interesting to dig into is your point on the legislation, which I would say, in preparation for this, I hadn't thought about who would make those decisions, right? I guess in my mental model, in most of my initial points, I thought we would do it ourselves, right? And I'm in favor, or we elite universities should and would do it ourselves. I think the strongest case for doing it with legislation is that, as you say, universities are competing and will compete with each other, that's core to their business model. And I think if they were denied legacy admissions as a whole, they would compete on other grounds. And I think that those other grounds, they would change the nature of development and it would change what they're competing for in the same way we saw a couple decades ago a big push towards need-blind admissions and then universities competing to have the most generous aid packages. I think if we had a push where you couldn't do legacy, you could imagine universities competing to be the most meritocratic and ways to provide evidence for that. And I think we could harness their competition and their business models to do that. And because I think becoming more meritocratic is good, is a force for social mobility and empowerment to me, I think that's a good thing.
This is going to turn into a love-in in a minute here, man. You know, if we just discovered, I've said when we were talking backstage, this is kind of the overarching point, which you should take home today, is that Dustin and I are both from Cleveland, Ohio. And the point of that is that lots of good things begin in the Midwest. So, and the Midwest is a place where students are, where the students at places like Stanford are probably underrepresented relative to students from the coast. So I agree with a lot. I would just add that in this, I don't want to take us too far out of our lane, but I do think there is a real tension here, and I really am looking forward to the further discussion on meritocracy. Because I think there's just a deep underlying question about what is a university meant to do, and how can it do that, right? On the knowledge production side, it's clearly the case, I think, that you gain by bringing together all of the, quote, top people, right? The top researchers. That's one of the ways that American universities have become preeminent in terms of research is by bringing together all of the top researchers in one place. And then there's a synergy there. But then there's a question as to whether that's the same model, that same approach to concentrating the talent, and I put quotes around that, the talent, whether that same approach actually furthers our educational goals. If the goal of education is to actually educate more people, have more learning, kind of spread the knowledge, in a sense, you could tell a story where meritocracy in the educational context, in terms of the learning goal, is actually antithetical to what should be the goals of education rather than in furtherance of it. You could tell a story where meritocracy actually converts universities from places of learning for everyone to places that are primarily focused on ranking, sorting, and selecting. And again, this is probably true for almost everyone here. If you knew for certain that you would have learned more at some other university, you still would have come to Stanford. You still would have come to Stanford. And when you were in high school, if you knew more, if you knew for certain that you would have learned more in a particular class, but that class might not have ended you up at Stanford, you probably would not have taken that class, right? These are just a couple little examples. We could go on, but the big idea is that there may be a tension between universities as ranking, sorting, selecting machines on one hand, which is what meritocracy is, and universities as educational institutions on the other. The last note on that is just to remember that the very term meritocracy was not a term that was invented by Michael Young, who wrote the book, The Rise of the Meritocracy. He wasn't using that term to signify some sort of utopia. Mm-hmm. Quite the opposite.
So can I separate two aspects? You talk about meritocracy, but you've also really been talking about equality of opportunity and fair equality of opportunity. And I'm going to define fair equality of opportunity, and as the philosopher John Rawls does, that children similarly talented and able should have, similarly motivated and able, should have the same opportunities to occupy important positions in the society. And there are obstacles to that, to competing on fair terms. And Dusty, you spoke a lot about the competition on fair terms, and that legacy seems like it's a departure from that competition. But what I worry about, and this is an partly empirical worry, is if you got rid of legacy admissions, it's not obvious to me you would make a substantial dent on the unfairness in opportunity, because so much of the unfairness in opportunity for children comes way before high school and way before the moment of applying to a place like Stanford. So you've gotten rid of legacy admissions, but you've still got a system where kids go to very unequal schools, where their class system generates lots of different privileges and experiences so I'm just trying to understand, like, in your model of how you're going to move forward on equality of opportunity, fair equality of opportunity. It wouldn't seem like legacy would be the main lever you would want to pull. You'd want to invest in K-12 education. And you'd want to actually break down some of the class barriers and racial barriers in K-12 education. So why legacy?
See, I think there's a couple gaps in the mental model there. And I think I think competition is an empowering thing. And I think when we're talking about I think we all sort of agree that at the initial condition, there's massive inequality. And you have some people who are just lucky to be born, way up the mountain higher, and other people are trying to climb up, right? And to me, I think my starting point is the fact that you can climb it all is amazing. And you're saying, oh, look, other people are climbing, they got like nicer climbing shoes and ropes and things like this. And to me, actually, people I know who are smart and driven and poor can definitely outwork privileged people. So if it just comes down to work and hustle, I feel like that's great, that's hopeful, I think for me, legacy in this metaphor is like, hey, we got these loner climbing shoes and ropes. Like, who are you going to give them to? The children of the people who already were, like, that's not who I would give them to if I was worried about trying to make the competition more equal. So to go back to the core point, I think legacy admissions is still tilting it in the opposite direction you'd want to. But I think the reason I think the competition is powerful is I think when you are looking at how unequal society is and how impossible many of the jobs that our students go on to have, that I have sitting here, seem like just impossible dreams. And the thing that takes that dream from seeming impossible to possible to me is when you are competing with a rich person who wants something and you take it from them, you get it instead. To me, that is powerful and empowering. And I think it's powerful and empowering in small numbers. Even if everyone does. If you see someone else do it, that is powerful and empowering and inspiring. And I think, to me, that role model, empowering-based, agency-based piece, even in small numbers, and all these elite places are small numbers of people. I really think making sure that the people who are here, who do have conspicuous mobility up the social ladder, who go on to be leaders, making them feel and know that when they were here, they did it in an empowered agency way. I think that has knock-on goods that cascades way down to everyone who knows them and sees them and their families. And that, I'll make a lot of trades on numbers in the meantime at a place like this. If we were talking about a flagship state university, I think I'd have a different opinion. But I think at these elite universities, that's part of our gap.
So just to be clear, are you saying that you would end legacy admissions and also implement very deliberately social mobility, first generation, low income, racial minorities, some sort of other programs? Is that what I'm getting?
I think I would move it back to the first comment I made, which is to say, so our gap is I'm like, let's lean into that first, let's collect and best and brightest meritocratic project. And then now, without legacy and other considerations, right? Let's say the hard problem is now an epistemic problem of latent potential in that space. And when we look at the backgrounds of people who are coming to the point of admissions, we should try and counteract it. So if someone has not had a lot of opportunity, who knows how great they could be? Separately, and this is to my point, if they have the child of someone who went at a place like this, probably how great they could be is pretty similar to how great they are. You know? And so to me, I would de-weight it. And it's great. There are some people who in high school already have written multiple scientific papers or a book. That's great. And who cares what advantage they had? That's great potential. But I think, you know, in the cases that are not that, let us try the hard work of finding the transformative people who are scattered across the country and the world and collect them. And I think I think after you remove legacy, it aligns these goals then of empowerment, social mobility, knowledge production all together. If you do that.
Yeah, these are great points. The intuition there seems to be that there's a sense of privilege, right? Economic privilege, that might overstate future potential in some way. And I've embraced that for years myself, but now I don't really know if I buy that anymore. I think it might get the relation between privilege and achievement completely wrong. And at this point, I can't help, since this is March. Oh, it's not March, it's April. But we're still in March Madness. And, you know, when I think about the Golden State Warriors, my favorite basketball team,
You're
I
from
am a
Cleveland,
basketball
man.
fan.
What?
I'm always a LeBron fan. I'm always a LeBron fan. LeBron is I'm always a LeBron fan. But when I think about the Warriors, you know, I think, what does Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Gary Payton Jr. have in common? They're all the children of NBA players, which is the best privilege you can have if you want to be a basketball player. The fact that Steph Curry had extraordinary privilege, that didn't overstate his potential. It actually was the basis of his potential. He probably would not be the greatest shooter in the history of the game had his father not been an NBA player. And I say this with apologies to my own children, right, who wanted to play basketball. But I was not able to provide them that advantage. So if we're thinking really, you know, hard about it, I really don't know what the relation is between privilege on the one hand and future performance on the other. It could overstate, or it could be a foundation, right? Let me make one other point, which is again, kind of a big point, which will go to the meritocracy discussion later. You know, we talk about universities as kind of picking winners, being kingmakers, selecting leaders in American society. That's historically been what universities do. If you look at the Supreme Court right now, say, I think like 8 out of the 9 justices all went to Harvard or Yale, full stop. We don't even have a Stanford representative, right? And you see the same sort of thing when you look across leadership positions in American society. Joe Biden is perhaps more significant, not because of his age, but because he did not go to an elite university. Now, this may have made sense in 1950 or 1920, at a time when life expectancy was 50 years or 70 years. But we're entering an era now when people are going to assume leadership positions in their 60s, 70s, 80s. You all have a realistic hope of all living to 100 or beyond. I think it makes less and less sense for us to rely on an inherently flawed process of universities picking the winners for society at a time when kids are 17 years old. There is nothing that any 17-year-old can do or has done that will warrant them being anointed a leader of society by virtue of which institution they happen to attend. We need to scale back the powers that universities have in that regard and allow leaders to emerge over time, perhaps into their 30s, 40s, maybe even into their 70s, when they assume roles on which we will rely for their leadership.
So now I have clarity that I dislike the Warriors for legacy admissions reasons. I think the fear I have with that path is that I think other forms of elite power, like money, political connection, I feel are so powerful and so push towards societal stratification. And when I think about the ability for people to come from the very bottom of the socioeconomic and political power ladder to the very top, and I try and find things that can do that, the fact that coming to a place like this in 4 years can take someone from there to the top seems incredibly powerful. And I worry that the reason this outsized influence in some way of these elite universities in some ways, to me, is maybe necessary, is maybe one of the very few ladders we have, is we need something equally potent to those other forces. And I worry in this world you're talking about where we don't have that power of universities, that there'll be social stagnation, that it doesn't allow for slow, revealed climbing, that actually the only shot we have of giving people that road of credentialing, that this is one of the only spots doing that. And so I'm very concerned about the world of losing that. I don't have some other model that can provide that level of social mobility besides our great elite American universities.
Well, I do have a model, though. I do have the feeling that we have a system that is more stratified than it's ever been in our history, and this is in terms of if you look at the wealth and economics of universities. If you even look at the students who attend universities, this idea of collecting all the smartest people in one place and having stratification along that dimension, that's not characteristic of universities for most of their history. 30, 40, 50 years ago, that wasn't characteristic of universities. There was actually much more diversity on the basis of achievement at places like Stanford, places like Harvard, all the Ivy League schools, even the schools we now think of as just enrolling a very small sliver of the achievement spectrum. So what we're doing is really, it's something new. And the trade-off we're making, and I think the story we tell ourselves, is that the massive inequality we have in the system, all the stratification in our system, all that's okay, because we're giving every person a chance to make it to the top. How much is that chance? Well, at many schools, or not many, but increasing numbers of schools, the chance is about 3%, 4%, maybe 5%. Just think about that as you look around the room. You count off by 20, and you think every 20th student gets that chance. The rest of them don't get that chance, right? And there's a trade-off there. And I'm also aware, as a someone who writes and teaches about issues related to race, that there are clear racial dimensions to that as well. I mean, part of the deal we made with diversity prior to the Supreme Court invalidating it was that we'll have a stratified system. We'll give some African Americans, some Latinos, some members of other underrepresented groups. We give you a chance to make it to the top. But what happens to the overwhelming majority of people in that group? 90, 95, 98% of that group, they're actually kind of locked out of that system. They're saddled with debt. They're in institutions where they actually don't have nearly the chances. And so the deal we're making implicitly is that we're going to pick one winner, but we're going to also designate 20, 30, 40, 50 losers in the process of picking that one winner. And we want people to continue playing that game. The alternative approach actually is to have a system that is much less focused on what the educational folks would call credentialing, which I think Dustin uses credentialing. Much less focused on credentialing. Because credentialing is just a way to hold up your degree and say, look, I'm smart, right? There's even one institution, it shall remain nameless, where I've heard professors joking one time. They said, how about if we did something new? We'll just admit students. We won't require them to come to any classes, and then we'll just award them degrees a few years later. That's a win-win, right? Professors can do research, students get the credential. It's recognizing the fact that the real work is done by the admissions office, and that's what the students come for. Of course, they didn't do that, but this institution does sort of function like that still. But and it's not Stanford. But that's kind of the deal we made. And the alternative actually would be to imagine what would it look like to have a system that was more focused on educating lots of people, to create more opportunities for learning for more people, where status was not inversely related to how many people you educated. What would it look like to have a system like that where we gave more people opportunities to learn, grow, and develop? That seems to be the system that is more, that fits better with the idea, which I think we both share, that it's hard to know how people are going to turn out. Right? A lot of people have potential that won't be manifest early on, and sometimes people seem to be doing well early on, but then they don't do well later, and it's really hard to make those predictions. One response to that problem of prediction is not to try to make ever better predictions, is actually to give more people the opportunity to show what they can do over time. And I think, and this would be a bigger change, right? This is not about legacy admissions. This is a broader change in how we should think about universities and society. But I think we could really do that, and we should do that, because the future of our nation depends on that, not just educating a small number, but educating a lot of people well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you brought it around at the end to say this is not about legacy admissions, but I think, like, it's hard for me to see preserving legacy admissions as a path on that road. Like,
I'm not arguing that.
I think the question is, where's the action? You know,
Yeah.
where is the action?
Okay, so yes, I mean, I think for me in the world where we are, like, I would see doing away with legacy admissions as closer in spirit to that than preserving it.
So let me ask you the other point that came up about the fundraising, you know, the business model where legacy and what are sometimes called development admits help create a system in which these very expensive universities that are delivering really great education can be needs blind. And there are very, very few universities in the United States. I mean, the big problem with most universities, you know, are not selective, but except by income. People can't afford to go. A handful of universities are needs blind. And the need, you know, one argument for legacy is that it sustains an economic model where you can continue to have needs-blind admission. Now, there are exceptions. MIT doesn't have legacies and also has needs-blind admission. You know, so there's an empirical question about how much does allowing legacies support it. And then I had raised to the two of you hypothetically, I mean, another way you could do this, and I'd be interested in what the audience thinks, get rid of legacies and just auction off a certain number of spots at Stanford. You know, your kid has to be above a certain level, but like anybody, and it'll be secret who you know you bought the seat for, and you could probably raise a ton of money, because I bet a lot of people would pay a lot for a slot in a very selective. So why not do it that way? And would that be an improvement on your part, or and how do you think about the issue if getting rid of legacies doesn't do that much to advance the equality of opportunity, but undermines needs-blind admission?
Well, I'll just a little bit. I'll just say I think universities already do something like that. We're just not forthright, and we don't have a formal system of doing it. That's, you know, you don't create the universities we've created without being very attentive to these sorts of factors in the admissions process. And so there's a question of, like, what would the trade-offs be if we were to be explicit about that, be completely open about that? And I would admire a university, the first university to announce, you know, we've had this policy for years of taking into account potential donations. Now we're going to make it explicit and formal, and we're going to auction a spot off, or auction multiple spots off, 10 spots a year. It wouldn't change at all the sort of demographics of the class, really. We're going to auction 10 spots a year off. Would they raise $1 billion a year? Maybe.
I don't disagree with this. I think, you know, for me, again, going back to my point at the beginning that I want to hold each admission spot in my hand and think about a whole family whose life you're transforming. And yeah, it's not big numbers, and yeah, there's other systems you could do. But if we can reduce the footprint of the fundraising on the number of spots it takes by auctioning it, great. Like, I think it'd be great if there was a world where we didn't have to do that, but in a world where we have beautiful auditoria with great mics, like, and you got to do it, I think let's do it in as few spots as possible.
All right, we should probably open it up to the audience for questions. So there are 2 mics on either side, and we'd love to hear from you. Now you've got us auctioning off spots at Stanford and...
Not official positions.
We're speaking as individuals, that's right.
Speaking as individuals, not
This
as
is individual
members of
faculty.
COAFA. All right, so maybe start on this side.
Hi, my name is Senkai. I'm an undergraduate at the university. I'm also a legacy student, and so this question has very much weighed on my mind because even though I know I love it here, I feel that my mission was in many ways, that experience was in many ways unjustly acquired. Something that throughout the conversation, it seems that the best case to defend legacy admissions is that at best, it is a means to an end, i.e., it allows the university in its mission of teaching, clinical care, education, or that it can benefit folks who can't afford it through financial admissions. But it's very clear that there are moral costs, there are reputational and signaling costs when higher education is under increasing attack, and it's also going to matter for the lives of those kids who weren't able to benefit from that. And so I guess the question here that I think Professor Banks raises, who is it that is the best actor to decide to adjudicate these trade-offs? Should it be the Dean of Admissions? Should it be the president and the faculty who run the university? Should it be the board of trustees who have fiduciary duty to the university? Should it be the university community as a whole? Or do you think it should be in the role of the state to decide, given that there are impacts on society as a whole?
Great question. You should think about law school. It's wonderful. But no, I had a little bit of trouble hearing you, but the question is who should decide? Dean of Admissions, and I'll say that given our Dean of Stanford, I have no problem giving him full authority, but Dean of Admissions, trustees, faculty, administration. I think the inevitable answer is that there are pieces of that decision which each part of the governance structure would have to have a say in, right? So we need to have, not we as a nation or as universities collectively, universities need to be having conversations about this and to think about, frankly, how the educational values, aspirations, goals of the university fit with the business model or the economic imperatives. And I mean, that's just a conversation to have, and that's going to differ across universities. It's not a decision that should be made by trustees alone, or faculty alone, or the Dean of Admissions alone typically, or the administration, because they all have particular interests. And what we're trying to do is to maximize not only the value of the university for itself, we're actually trying to, the broader canvas is to sort of maximize the societal or social value of the university, right? So we need to have a lot of different voices represented in that, both within the university, but maybe also people outside of the university who have perspectives.
So my question was, that I feel like legacy admissions kind of may align, and whether a certain university decides to allow it might align with their goals. Because you were talking earlier that they started need-blind admissions, and that sort of broadened, the pool, and I'm kind of forgetting my question, but essentially that they wanted to get more and more people to apply, and make it more selective, and like in doing so, wouldn't they need to get in order to get more people to apply, like they need to have good resources, good buildings, and actually, okay, now I'm getting to it, that actually our tuition doesn't cover all of the operating costs, like for instance of Stanford, and there's people who don't even go to the university who are funding all the operating costs, people who aren't even paying tuition. And so in order to have all these resources like Nobel laureates and fund their salaries, in order to actually be able to run as a university, like, wouldn't legacy admissions more align with being able to have all these opportunities and to remain that sort of elite club? And one more thing I wanted to add was, it seemed kind of more that it's geared towards maybe generating more profits. And I thought something that was kind of interesting was, as we all know, President Gay from Harvard, she resigned, but when looking at her statement, she doesn't even refer to Harvard as a university, rather, it's the Harvard Corporation. It seems like it's now not even a university, but more so a corporation. Like she said, dear members of the Harvard community, and then skip down, she said, but after consultation with members of the corporation, it has become clear that it is in the best interest of Harvard for me to resign. So how do you kind of balance that?
I think there's a lot there. One of the things that I think we're both talking about, and it underpins your question as well, is that there is, like, this is an expensive undertaking and there's a business model.
Yep.
I think, and I think that the details of the answer there have to do with the way universities are structured in those word choices. But I think what you tapped into when you talked about the financial aid isn't just the competition in rankings, which is real, but I think also there was a point, and this goes to the previous question as well, where universities were changing, tuition was changing, this was some years ago, and then all of a sudden it switched. We say, okay, if we're gonna have the best people, we're gonna have a competition to need blind admission and generous financial aid. And elite universities, as part of their business model, decided that was in their interest to do that, and it was important. To go to the earlier point of who should decide, I think we as higher education can decide now that, you know what, our admissions rates are way lower than they were, our costs are way higher than they were, our society's way more stratified than we were, and it is in the interest of our business model and prestige and ranking and all these other things to do away with legacy admissions for those reasons as well. And I think that there's a world and there's stories you could tell where that could be financially forward to do, but it just changes how and where prestige and money come from. But you are right that that is part of what animates a lot of this deliberation.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with a lot of, let me just add on one more little twist to this, is that, there are a lot of, part of the magic of what American universities have done is that they've combined all these different things which are in some way kind of incompatible, but they all help to sustain the university and our foundation for the university's greatness. Legacy admissions is one part of that. Another part of that in the admissions process, frankly, is the extraordinary importance given to athletics and recruited athletes and the enormous amounts of money that most universities devote to athletics. But that as well has an economic consequence, because part of the rationale for that, you might imagine, would be that, you're an undergrad, you go to the games, and, you have the school spirit. And when you're older, you're going to give a lot more money back to the institution because you have that spirit that was forged at the football games or at the basketball games or at some other events, right? And that's part of the reason why institutions, put so much emphasis in the sport. So again, that's just another area where there's no educational justification for the emphasis that we put on athletics, but there might be an institutional justification.
Just take a pause for a second because we wanted to do a second poll. So if you could answer the question, maybe in a different way, maybe in the same way, but.
Same question.
And are we going to give the results? Yeah. Okay. 30% keep legacies, 70% no legacies, and then we'll see the results here.
But we can't see if individual people change, though. So we could. Technology.
So wait, what's happened? Yeah. It's the same. All right, nobody changed their mind.
Well, maybe they did. We just don't know.
It could be that
Maybe they
everybody
switched.
changed
We
their
just don't
mind.
know. Yeah, we don't know.
Up to 30%.
Interesting. We're just putting up the same slide twice. Great. All right.
Hi, my name is Lillian. I'm a freshman. I am not a legacy admit, very definitely. I'm from Louisiana, and I know a few people from Louisiana who also got in who are not legacy admits. So one question that I had, I guess, for the both of you is, earlier we were talking about how legacy admissions, having the label of a legacy admit provides a student with benefits that they can get through their parents' connections to professors and interning opportunities in their high school careers and things like that. So I guess what I was wondering is, whenever we're talking about removing legacy admissions, outside of obviously what the points that have been brought up about how funding would then be allocated from donors and things like that, is there any harm outside of removing a label on a group of people who already are likely to have benefits that will help them to be more likely to get into these prestigious universities? And if so, how can we reckon with the fact that the universities that are considered prestigious are still built on a mindset in which some are meant to succeed based on their status and based on potentially their race, their socioeconomic status, and other factors that then come hand in hand with a legacy status?
So I think one of the things your question highlights is the advantages people bring to these spaces don't end at the moment of admissions, and how you navigate the university changes things. I think at its best, and we've talked a lot about the gap between the best of what universities can be and the reality of what they are, but I think at its best, what places like this can be is that faculty can provide, can help bridge, right, sorry. Oh, wow, much louder. I think at its best, faculty can help bridge that gap. I think certainly the experience I had as a first-generation college student was that the day I arrived on college, my family, who maybe will watch this video, stopped being the main source of good advice for me. And other adults who cared about me, who were mostly professors, filled that role that a lot of my other friends were getting from their families. And I think that's one of the amazing things about a residential college in a place like this. My best friend here, I went to his wedding, he's also a professor. His uncle has a Nobel Prize. Unbelievable. What a resource to have at family dinners and weddings. That is, my uncles, can help build a house or, clean your toilet. But it's amazing. Some people have that. But the thing is, if you're a Stanford student here, if we are building relationships with our students and we're here on campus, you have academic aunts and uncles, ideally, who also have Nobel Prizes. And that, to me, is part of going to the point of, not the competition to get in, but the competition after. It's a way that places like this can help level that playing field. So I think, ideally, if we were living up to our potential and weren't as busy as we are, we would be doing that and doing that better. And that's my hope.
Yeah, I like all of that. I would just add to raise a question. Imagine what would the student body look like if the goal of the admissions process was not to try to admit the highest achievers, right, at an early age, but was instead to try to admit 100% the students for whom the university could make the most difference in their lives. Completely different model. And I know Dusty agrees with this because I've heard Dusty say this before. Right? We're agreeing with that.
I'll quibble with it. So I think
He's disagreeing with himself.
I'm disagreeing with myself. I'm like the future speaker. So I do think that consideration of the impact of coming here should be a factor. And I certainly like it more than a lot of factors we have. But actually, I think a fear I have as we tinker with these things is I think these universities, as powerful ladders of social mobility, are that way partially because they are a place of the elite. And I do think we need a critical mass of people here for it to have that transformative impact. Because these elite people who you're in school with do control all sorts of things about society. And you having relationships with them and networking with them is part of how this transformative impact can happen. And so I think one of the tough things for me, and I think legacy is easier, but I think one of the tough things is as we think about being stewards of the place and stewards of that ladder of mobility, is I do think we need to maintain a critical mass of that eliteness in order to be an effective ladder. And I think that is the trade. I don't think we can do only that.
Maybe I misheard, but I thought you just smuggled in a support for legacy admissions.
No, I think
I thought I heard that.
I think it's a blunt instrument. I think if we say, look, we need enough elite people to be a ladder of mobility, and we're like targeted intervention of elite folks. You know, our alumni are plenty elite, but I think we could do it with fewer spots. Okay. Rather than the blunt instrument of legacy. But you're right, that's my greatest weakness, right there. The critical mass for social mobility, keep working on that.
And I don't even think that's I think that's a recognition of the complexity of the situation, right? I mean, the institution, like many complex institutions, it's not one thing, and it's not pursuing one goal, right? It's pursuing multiple goals, and it has to use multiple methods to do that.
Hi, Mr. Schroeder, I have a question. So I think this question of legacy admissions is really one of distribution. You have, let's say, a legacy student who's gotten into Stanford. If they hadn't gotten in, just purely based off of that, if you remove the legacy and that was the deciding point, they wouldn't be out of college. They would be at maybe a slightly less selective college, UCLA, or God forbid, UC Berkeley. And just the other way around, you have students who maybe legacy was just the one thing that didn't get them in, but they're not, they are at those other schools. They're doing very well there, I imagine. Maybe even a little bit better on average at a less selective school than at the most selective schools. So my question is, why is it so imperative to, if we're going to get rid of legacy admissions, basically just swap those students out? Take students who would go to Stanford, put them in UC Berkeley, take those students, put them in Stanford. If it's really just a question of moving students around between very good universities, why is it so important?
Yeah, so I think, again, this goes to this point of my mental model of what is empowering about this. And so I'm mostly thinking of students who are, so I think it's two things. One is for the knowledge production function, where we say there really are transformative thinkers who are going to invent new things or create new art or make new discoveries that are going to change the world, and collecting those people together is important. And I think legacy makes us worse at judging that. And I think that's clean. I think that's by itself. What you're asking is this other, more social mobility piece. And I think, in that case, it is important when someone comes, it is not just that, oh, hey, you got in because of luck on some lottery. You got in because of largesse of the elites deciding you're welcome. Or you got in because of pity that you've performed your disadvantage. You got in because this place says, you know what, we think it's possible that you are the transformative thinker and learner of your generation, and we're investing in that. I think that is powerful for you as an individual, and I think that is powerful for your community, and I think it is powerful for people who see you as a role model, and that is the thing that I think legacy cheapens. And I think that is, and I think this is a gap, like I think that is powerful and worth preserving, and that is part of why I think that.
I disagree. Let me disagree with that. No, I do think, I appreciate that, but I do think that it would be a good thing if we, as students at places like this, had a deeper appreciation for the role of luck.
Yeah.
Not only in their admissions, but just in their life. Or you could call it grace. You could call it a lot of things. But the feeling that you have to be, and that you are, or must be, deserving of these sort of riches that surround us when you're 17, that seems to lead you down one of two paths. One is a real sense of entitlement and arrogance, which is not a good thing. And the other is a crippling sense of self-doubt. There might be a reason that imposter syndrome is so widespread, because students who are 17, 18, 20 years old, walking around the campus and being told how great they are and that they earned this or that, they know deep inside that there's nothing they could have done in their short life to have earned these riches, which are, unparalleled, again, in the history of the world. There's nothing you could have done to earn that. So I think relinquishing that sense that you deserve it, that you've earned it, that this is mine because I won the race and, I surpassed these other people, relinquishing that might be a beneficial thing, both for the individual and for the society.
So I'm going to give my kumbaya a moment here. I actually think you would need to hold on to both ideas. The idea that as an individual you matter and that you make a difference in the world, and at the same time that life is full of luck and we're just dust, and we have to hold those things together, and it's really hard to do it. But I worry, Dusty, the attitude of I'm deserving, special, better, by itself, not tempered by I'm one among many, that can be a dangerous attitude, and it's a kind of elitism I think we should be worried about. We want, people with possibility and talent and expertise who will make contributions, but we don't want elitists.
And that's a point, just to add on to that, then is it possible to be elite without being elitist? All right, just meditate on that right when you leave. Is it possible to be elite without being elitist? And to underscore Deborah's point, I think it really is the case that the sense of entitlement and I've earned it and the winners deserve the spoils, that is at the core of what has led to so much ruin in our society right now and so much division. That is at the core. That's fueling political polarization, is fueling extraordinary backlash, is causing people to have distrust in institutions. And it's not just because those other people, are sore losers. It's because we, and I say people at places like this, we have embraced attitudes and self-conceptions that are making their negative reactions completely, if not justifiable, then fully understandable.
Yeah, I think some of our gap is who we're imagining feeling this way. So I think when you're saying some of these things, so you're saying, okay, this is actually our already elite students feeling they earned it. And I think that is bad. I think I'm willing to trade some of that for the feelings of our underrepresented students feeling they belong. And an example of that, and I think the competition is important for this, there was actually just a video put out by the EE department that was featuring my colleague, Ifer Ozger, who's another first-gen college student who's a professor in electrical engineering. And she was talking up in her video, her entire video, she's like, I was growing up as a young woman in Turkey. I happened to be given this physics test. I took it. I didn't think anything of it. Then I was the second woman ever on the Turkish National Physics Olympiad team. Then I beat all these boys. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do physics. Maybe I can be an academic. Now she is a professor of electrical engineering here. And I don't think it was an elitist move. I think the competition falsified a whole raft of narratives for her and showed her she could belong and could compete with these people. And that is the type of empowerment I don't want to trade for just luck.
So I'm aware that there are, I think, 6 people in line. So I wonder if we could take like 2 questions at a time, just in the interest of trying to get through. So maybe don't answer until we have 2 questions on the table, and we'll see how fast we can go.
Hi, my name is Dorjan. I'm the Assistant Director of PhD Admissions here at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Yippee! So admissions are obviously a topic that's really close to my heart, especially the admissions in terms of equity and access and barriers of education from K through 16. And something that I would just like to hear all of your thoughts on are about how your views change as you move from undergrad to grad to PhD, just because a student's relationship to the school definitely changes depending on if they're an undergrad versus a PhD student. Just in the matter, I guess, for context for others is, PhD students almost are employees in a way. They work under their faculty versus an undergrad whose purpose on campus is definitely to be educated and to be trained in a way. So I just wonder how your thoughts shift.
Wonderful question.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much for your time. This has been phenomenal. Dean Satz, Dean Brest, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this quarter together. The one line of inquiry that I think I struggled to resonate with Professor Banks was this idea of the superiority of American higher education. I'm from New Delhi, And you rightly said that this is probably the only educational theater in the world where privately run universities consistently outperform the public ones. And a part of this you attributed to the principle of giving universities choice, this leeway that you said makes it so that, number one, we can practice legacy admissions, and also what results in an endowment that's 8, 9, 10 times higher than our competitors across the world. So my question is, with 8, 9, 10 times the endowment, what makes an education here 8, 9, 10 times more transformative than at ETH Zurich, or IIT Delhi, or the University of Hong Kong, or the University of Amsterdam, or even at UC Berkeley? And I think that you will maybe find, like I found, that that isn't the case in my head, or at least that analysis isn't a proportional one. And if you do come to the same conclusion that I do, how do you still privilege that private school leeway over a state-mandated fairer playing field, or the other principles that Professor Schroeder brought up, is my question.
Oh, that's to me. Oh, I guess I will. Well, no, thank you for that. These are both wonderful questions. I would just say that what makes education more transformative? To be honest, I don't know that the education is transformative. And I'll say that as someone who's spent the last 2 days preparing for class, right? New quarter. We want education to be transformative, but people at other universities that are much lower ranked, they want their education to be transformative as well. So if you had to say, what's the difference between the universities at the apex of the status hierarchy and the ones farther down? I could not convince you that the difference is you're going to have a better educational experience. The difference is really that you're going to have a better credential that will signify you as a certain type of person, and that will open certain jobs and opportunities. That's not an educational benefit, that's a signaling benefit, you might say, to use the business school terminology. That's a signaling benefit. And that's just the model we have. So, an offshoot of that is what Dusty's alluded to, and what we've discussed a lot is that, this accumulation of resources, it has allowed American universities to attain research preeminence worldwide. If you look at the number of Nobel Prize winners, for example, at American universities versus elsewhere, we do really well. And that's a benefit, presumably, for the world, right? Because we have people who are doing research that is changing lives. So that's the response there. And very briefly, how have my views changed? I would just say, so I was a Stanford undergrad. I grew up in Cleveland, in inner city Cleveland. Would have been unlikely that I would have ended up at a place like Stanford and came here. In retrospect, there was a lot of chance and fortuity. At the time, I would have thought it was just, well, I'm really smart, full stop. That's the end of the story. I can do well on every test there is. And I believed that all the way through law school. And on into academia, but over time, having children of my own, seeing more things, I have a deeper appreciation now for the fortuity that's involved in all of our lives, and also for the very great difficulty of trying to predict who will do what in the future, and then also trying to assess the value of what people would do. So I think that's really just a fraught process, and we probably have way too much confidence in predicting how things are going to work out for people.
Nice. I'll take the other question then. I think.
Oh, that was it. I thought.
Oh, all right.
I don't know. Go ahead.
I think when your specific question about how to think about graduate school admissions and the difference there, I think to me, when I think about these three examples of producing knowledge, collecting people to produce knowledge, the social mobility impact of the degree, and the benefit to the larger world, I think those get rebalanced depending on not only the level of degree, but the topic area. So some areas like PhDs are really deeply an apprenticeship and knowledge production, mostly living in that first one, though people will go on and populate the professorate, so you could argue it contributes to the others as well. An MBA, I think, is very heavily in the social mobility piece. And so I think just clarity about each of these goods and how they get balanced at each of the levels, I think would be how I would think differently about those.
Thanks. Okay, 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Arya, and my question is about how selectivity in donations would improve because of legacy admits. So it's like, would it be more equitable and just as effective to improve selectivity through increasing admission numbers and amounts instead of the yield rate? And then the other part to this is just how much of the total endowments are actually comprised of alumni donation, and how much of that is a delta based on whether or not like the donor's child attends the university, and would that actually end up changing whether they donate or not? And if these aren't in fact significant amounts, then would legacy admits outweigh the life-changing impact of others who can have that spot?
Right. Second.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Leslie. I'm a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of Education and actually study and research admissions. And something that I've been thinking about a lot is that when, for example, Amherst College decided to remove legacy admissions, there was a lot of critique that they do it at a time when their college class is the most diverse it's ever been. And the classes of diverse students from racially marginalized backgrounds, first-generation backgrounds, low-income backgrounds, is the highest it's ever been, and yet now they're being revoked from the legacy admission preference that their peers might have enjoyed, and that doesn't mean that necessarily they're going to become the elite, obviously not white, I guess imaginary that we have of legacy students now, because that's currently who composes legacy students majority now. So I'm wondering, how do you kind of reconcile that with the fact that these classes are becoming more diverse and their children may not necessarily be the elites at the point of their application cycles?
That's a good point. Yeah. I had a hard time hearing some of that, but there's this irony that so I'm an alum of Stanford, actually, as an undergrad, and when I talk to other black alums, I have detected quite a bit of irritation, maybe anger, that just at the moment that they're about to benefit from something, people want to end the program. And that's a real feeling, that you have black alumni groups and other people of color groups who feel like, hey, you've been operating this way all this time. Now the moment that the colored folks are about to become part of it, suddenly we have to end it, right? And they especially are concerned that ending it when affirmative action is prohibited, that doesn't mean those slots that are eliminated for legacy, that they're going to other black or Latino applicants. They're more likely to go to affluent white applicants, say. And people are very aware of that, and a lot of alums are not happy about it.
Yeah, I guess on my side, it's still hard for me to imagine that if we decided we really cared about that and we're starting from scratch, that legacy admissions is how we would choose to do it. That giving people admissions based on where your parents went to school is a force of empowerment and mobility. That seems like I could imagine lots of other ways to doing it, including even moderate approaches to dialing it back that specifically speak to this. But I think the idea of holding up legacy itself as a good for inclusion and empowerment seems a hard sell. On the numbers, those are all sorts of things we're definitely not allowed to talk about.
Oh, but, well, yeah, we didn't answer that question, though, did we?
Well, it was exactly how much money do we get from
I don't know.
legacy
Yeah,
versus
I don't know, and it's likely to be different from across different institutions, right? I mean, this is kind of like this is data that institutions almost certainly have, and they're almost certainly not going to release it to the public or even widely within the institution for obvious reasons.
Okay, last two questions, and thank you everybody for really wonderful discussion.
Oh.
Oh, wow. I hope you'll forgive me, because I just wanted to actually make a couple of comments. And first, I have to say, Professor Banks, I love the Warriors analogy, and you talk about Steph Curry being a legacy. And if anyone who knows basketball knows how hard he works.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing that has to be, that I felt I had to represent, is that no one in this room, regardless of whether you were admitted as a legacy or for whatever reason you think you were admitted, you worked really hard to be here. And I have to express a great deal of admiration for the admission process. So I'm an alum. I'm also a former admission officer here at Stanford, and I'm a current development officer. And I think the last comment that I would make is that it is really hard in April when decisions come out, because we do not admit all legacies who apply, and we in the development office are right on the front line getting hit with a lot of anger, and it has completely taken out a lot of relationships. A person could just say, well, that was my whole undergraduate experience, and I'm washing my hands of Stanford. So that's one thing. But I also want to point out, too, that there is a multi-generational thing that happens, and that's partly through the legacy process. I can tell you about dorms that some of you might be living in that are the legacy of legacies, multi-generational members of families that have been at Stanford for a very long period of time, feel tremendous ownership. They're RAs, they're TAs, they're people who are part of the community. So it almost feels like people are othering legacies a little bit here. And I think that, I'm not a legacy. My children are legacies. One of them graduated with honors from Earth Systems. And I think that they work incredibly hard. Everyone here has worked incredibly hard to be where you are. So I just felt I had to say that.
Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Larissa. I'm a law student. Hard to follow with my dumb question. That was very poignant. I just am curious about both of your opinions on like traditional quantitative measures of success, like ACT, SAT, GPA, because it does seem to intersect a lot with this. On Dusty's side, I know you said you're a fan of meritocracy, but it really seems like some of the same third variables poison those measures, like wealth, that also poisons legacy. And then on Rick's side, I know you said that you don't think that legacy is necessarily fair, that you think it's unfair. And it seems that those quantitative measures are also unfair without some of the pros that seem to balance out the cons. And then also, like, what is the alternative? Because qualitative considerations can introduce bias. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think for me, my sort of earlier cheesy mountain climbing analogy, I think, is sort of how I feel about the tests and things. I think it's like, hey, you're climbing this mountain, other people are climbing too, other people have shoes and ropes and things like that, which are the social, like the economic covariance of these tests, and say there's an advantage, but at least there's a way. If somebody really does come from nothing, study super hard, get really high scores on those tests, it can be a flag in that small number of cases to identify someone and unlock that opportunity. Now, that's not an argument. It's not a statistical argument. It's not something that works in large numbers, and it's not something that moves the whole thing, right? But I do think that I'm cautious about discarding that, because I think especially at places where we admit such small numbers of people, those stories are important and good. And so that's, to me, when I say, look, the fact that you can climb it all seems great. It's not my most preferred state of affairs, but I really am shy about doing away with it. That's my feeling on that topic.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we can have much longer conversations about all of these issues. I hope many of you can continue the conversation after we end. On test scores, short answer is that I think that the case against test scores has been dramatically overstated. Are tests useful in helping you identify who will be the best students? Yes, they are. They're very useful in helping you identify who will be the best students. Are they unfair? Well, yes, they are unfair, but so are all the alternative measures that one might rely on. Those are unfair too. And the underlying problem here, which we don't have time to elaborate, the underlying problem is that the whole history of testing and maybe even selection goes back to trying to differentiate aptitude or potential from achievement, right? That was the idea when the SAT was devised, was to try to figure out, quote, who was the smartest, who had that latent potential that we know is out in the population, rather than who was the highest achiever by virtue of all the advantages they've had in life. And we've never been able to find a way to identify potential, aptitude, talent that's untainted by the same influences that shape achievement. And rather than delude ourselves, frankly, that we can, precisely do that, I think it would be much better to try to create more opportunities for more people rather than keep doubling down on trying to equitably allocate the very small, scarce opportunities that we have.
All right, on that note, we're out of time, but this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank the speakers. And next week, we will be talking about whether people should be paid to give up a kidney and whether we should have a market in organs. So stay tuned.
Who's going to talk about that?